This meeting.
Hold
No,
on. Hold on.
hold on. Oh, sorry. Live stream.
Please.
Are we set now?
We're still building. 1 second.
Oh, okay.
And we're live.
Thank you, Jess. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting of the Pinelands Climate Committee to order. Welcome you all. This is our first Climate Committee meeting of the year. And I'd like to ask our committee members who've all received a copy of the packet that included our minutes of our last meeting from November. Could I hear a motion to adopt the minutes from our last meeting?
Moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jerry. All right, are there any comments or edits, questions about the minutes? All right, hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor of the adoption of the minutes as submitted, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the meeting minutes are adopted. And on our agenda, we have 3 items for update with regard to state initiatives. And I'd like to turn things over to our executive director to give us those updates. Thank you, Sue.
I'm going to immediately turn the first one over to Stacy, who you should be able to see on your screen. She's just going to give you a brief update on where things stand with the DEP's recent rule proposal.
Okay.
As you know, in November, Ed gave a presentation with regard to DEP's inland flood rule proposal. That package essentially brought what pertained to stormwater and Flood Hazard Control Act. It's designed to create forward or utilize existing and future data to address stormwater in order to bring into development consideration climate change. In particular, it was a response to the significant flooding that had occurred in 2021, 2022. So essentially it updates the NOAA data that both the commission and DEP rely upon to calculate stormwater and stormwater management requirements. So we submitted a letter on February 3rd to DEP supporting the amendments and recommending and advising them that they would be incorporated by reference into the Pinelands Comprehensive Management Plan based on the most recent stormwater rule update that we did. So that's it.
Okay, thank you, Stacy. Any committee members have any questions for Stacy about that update?
I do, Mark.
Go ahead, Ed.
Stacy, the updated NOAA numbers, are those updated till, what's the most recent data we have for the NOAA numbers?
That would be something that Ed could answer that I can't because I haven't looked at it. It's more technical than I'm comfortable with.
Let me come back to one that maybe you can handle. Then the other question then would be, I guess, how often does DEP plan to update these? I mean, if they update them by our rules, it's automatically incorporated. So I'm trying to get at where we are now, where we're going. And that may be a question for DEP too, but
what the rules do is they create or add, I'm losing my words, so I apologize this morning. So they're using a current precipitation data, and then they're also going to adopt factors that will be used to sort of project what those allocation numbers would be going forward. So it's two-phased. So it'll update, as you know, right now the stormwater rules and the flood hazard rules look backwards, and they're only using data, I think, up to 2020. But now they'll have factors that can be used in order to predict what potential future flooding would be.
and decision makers can rely on those numbers in making decisions?
Yes.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, I would just add that Stacy's correct. It's the 2-phase approach that DEP's taken. So the NOAA Atlas 40 data is 20 years old. So they've taken that data, they brought it up to the current, and that was the first phase. And then they retained a researcher at Cornell University, and that team projected rainfall increases out 100 years. And so that's the second phase. So they built in, based on their climate models, these increased, these are large storm event rainfall totals, and all of the infrastructure will now need to be sized to accommodate those 100-year future storms, recognizing that this type of infrastructure has a useful life of at least 100 years.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Ed.
And Stacy, we don't have any idea about their schedule moving forward. I imagine they received a lot of public comment, would be my guess. So it may take them a while to go through and respond to all of the comments. So we're not aware of their adoption schedule. Although we did hear from Nancy, whose last name I forget it.
Nancy Campbell.
At DEP recently, and they were going to meet with her. I mean, perhaps others at DEP about implementation. So assuming DEP adopts, just making sure that DEP understands how we're going to be implementing the rules. Our towns are in the process of adopting their stormwater ordinances right now. I think DEP may need to update its own model stormwater ordinance for municipalities outside the Pinelands area. For us, the ordinances that we wrote them with the knowledge that DEP is going to be amending its rules. So I think we won't need our towns to make other changes. At least I hope that's the case. But we're going to talk to them a little bit about implementation and how the commission will move forward with implementation once those rules are adopted. When we review applications, essentially. So that'll be upcoming.
Well, I have a question. Is this going to impact the way we review applications now prior to the implementation of the flood protection rule?
No, we'd be waiting for DEP to adopt. They need to adopt their rule before it's effective anywhere. So no, we won't be. Our rules and the model ordinances cross-reference DEP's rules. So once their rules are amended, then those amended standards will be applied and implemented when we review applications. So we just are waiting to see what their schedule is.
All right. Okay. Well, I'm sure you'll keep us updated on that as we find out what the DEP is going to be doing with regard to implementation. Any other committee members with questions or comments for Stacy or Ed?
Yeah, Mark.
Go ahead, Al.
And can you give some examples of the type of infrastructure that will be subject to the new design rules?
Sure. So DEP does have a very helpful PowerPoint presentation where they identify like the aerial footprint of a stormwater basin. One that would be sized based upon today's 100-year storm, or I'm sorry, 10-year storm, and one that would be sized based upon the 10-year storm 100 years into the future. So that they show these things to be increasing on the order of about 25%. The basins will get larger. Some of them may have the same footprint, but they'll get deeper. So that would be an example. Certainly piping sizes will need to increase to accommodate these larger flows so we can get that water off the development site through larger conveyances. So that's a couple of examples. Infiltration facilities, conveyance piping, things of that nature.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alan.
Take up more of the regional growth area.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. All right, anyone else? All right, thanks very much, Stacy and Ed, for that presentation. I guess we'd move on to the Interagency Council on Climate Resilience update.
Yeah, Ed's got his microphone on, so he can just continue. He has a presentation.
All right, thank you.
Let's cue it up.
Oh, okay, great.
So just as this is going to bring up the presentation, I'll just let you know that the commission staff continues to engage with the state's Interagency Council on Climate Resilience. I apologize for those slides, they're a little hard to read.
I think if
Maybe
you
you can turn the lights off.
I will.
So we continue to engage. As a matter of fact, the Executive Director Brogan and I met last Wednesday with the state's Deputy Climate Resilience Officer. And she reached out to us and all of the other member agencies just to basically make sure that we are aware of the deadlines and the objectives that they've charged each agency with meeting. It gave Director Brogan an opportunity to alert the DEP and the IAC that we are going to run into at least a short-term staffing issue. And so the IAC was willing to suggest to us that they would attempt to help us to the extent that they can, recognizing that we will be short of staff, at least in the short term. And I attended yesterday's monthly IAC meeting, and I'll talk a little bit about what was talked about at that meeting yesterday. One of the things that the IAC has asked each agency to prepare is what they're calling this agency at a glance summary. And I'm not going to read it, but basically what it does is it describes, in this case, the mission of the Pinelands Commission, a little bit of our background, and importantly, the programs that the commission administers. And you'll see there at the bottom of the slide, the Pinelands Climate Committee is certainly relevant to this IAC Resilience Action Plan programs. And we, in essence, have a leg up because many of the agencies that are members of the IAC don't have rules like ours that have been in place for all of these years that go toward climate resilience, nor do they have a committee specifically charged with addressing these issues. So importantly, the IAC has contracted with a couple different firms. Michael Baker Associates is kind of helping the department shepherd all of these various agencies in preparing these resilience action plans. And they've put together a list of advisory group participants. These are folks that, in this case, have subject matter expertise in extreme heat. So that's going to be the topic of our upcoming resilience action plan. I've been curious about who is going to represent the various seats on that advisory group, and we were just I alerted to those organizations yesterday. I've got a slide that describes who it will be that will be helping us in meeting this resilience action plan preparation of that document. So the advisory groups are going to meet with all of us. We're going to give them our ideas. They're going to give us their feedback based upon their national experience with climate resilience. And ultimately, we hope to come up with a document that's relatively uniform across agencies that addresses extreme heat in ways that each individual agency feels the need to do so. So this is a quick snapshot, kind of sketchy a little bit because he's a little vague on some of this, but this is the timeline, and you can see March 31st rapidly approaching. We're going to be asked to share our draft action plan list of items that we intend to address in our resilience action plan for extreme heat. They did reassure us that this is just at this point a draft bulleted type presentation, not a lot of meat on the bones, but general topics, high level outline of what it is that we think this agency can do relative to extreme heat. Then April 11th, the IAC will identify which agency will lead on specific resilience action plan topics. And this is important because now that we alerted DEP that we have a staff issue, they assured us that they won't assign us something that our current staffing level is incapable of handling. So it's likely that we'll work in partnership with another lead agency. I suspect it might be the Department of Environmental Protection. We will play a role, but we're not going to be given the primary task to identify some of these topics early on. The agencies are going to share that list of current actions. So this is going to be an opportunity where we get to shine a light on all of the things in the CMP that currently go a long way toward addressing extreme heat. And we'll also identify some of the ideas that this committee has talked about that we might engage in as we move into implementing these actions. This summer, the draft resilience action plans will be released by the IAC. I think DEP and the IAC wants this extreme heat document to be released while New Jersey is experiencing extreme heat during the summertime months. So there's relevance to the folks that are receiving it. Final document is expected to be turned over to the IAC in the fall. They're generally talking about early October. And this is essentially the first chapter. So extreme heat is what I'll call the 2023 chapter, and then additional topics will be addressed in subsequent annual releases. I think that we'll see flooding likely to be the next issue that each agency is asked to address. Okay. So I had put together a PowerPoint presentation several years ago for graduate students at Rutgers, and then we did it as a Pinelands speaker series presentation, and again, most recently at the short course that was done down in Stockton, where we had identified in very broad terms all of the potential impacts that may be experienced in the Pinelands area related to extreme heat. So I'm going to run through these pretty quickly. There's a lot more detail in those PowerPoint presentations, and they are online, both on YouTube and on the Commission's website. But extreme heat, so you can think about heat-related mortality. So when we get these heat spells, there's definitely a spike in deaths as a result of that. Certainly among vulnerable population. Heat stress, heat stroke affect primarily outdoor workers. So I think about the agricultural workers, those in the construction field. We've got workers at the military bases that are going to be exposed to these extreme heat conditions. Increased infectious diseases, Lyme disease, West Nile, ragweed pollen certainly is all exacerbated under extreme heat. Air quality is impacted. Respiratory illness, we've got asthma sufferers throughout the region. And as ground level ozone climate penalty is sometimes referred to, that relates to the condition where you have nitrous oxides present in the atmosphere, volatile organic chemicals that are present in the atmosphere, primarily from things like paints, gasoline, those types of things. And those chemicals in the presence of sunlight and heat form a photochemical smog, which is a severe irritant to lungs. And so that is a significant concern with extreme heat. And then harmful algal blooms proliferate, particularly when temperatures rise. And those harmful algal blooms have the potential to expose people and pets to neurologic poisons that are present in surface organisms. Infrastructure impacts, we talked a little bit about this, but now these are related to extreme heat. So we know that pavement takes a beating during extreme heat. Bridges sometimes malfunction because of expansion of metals in those bridges. Rail materials can be stressed. This is important. Reduced efficiency of electric generating stations, including solar voltaic panels. So photoelectric panels efficiency decline when the temperatures rise. They actually become less efficient as temperature rises. Power line failures, transformer failures, refrigeration unit failures, all as a result of stress due to extreme heat. And I was surprised to read a couple of years ago that some of the nuclear power plants in the country had to actually scale back the amount of electricity that they could produce because the cooling water used to cool those plants was rising to a temperature that inhibited efficient cooling. So they actually had to reduce the power output when it was needed most during these extreme heat events. Dam failures, this is a little bit of a stretch, but you can pretty much draw relationships between extreme heat and many things. So extreme heat leads to the ability for the atmosphere to hold increased moisture. That results in larger storm events, and we've experienced this some probably 15 years ago or so, where we had massive dam failures all throughout the Pinelands region as a result of intense rainfall events driven by extreme heat in the atmosphere. Agricultural impacts are sure to impact the Pinelands region, reduce crop yields, invasive insects, plant pathogens, irrigation demands. Some of our principal crops rely on cold temperatures in the wintertime. And if we lose those cold temperatures, we may see a reduced ability to produce the berry crops that the region is known for. Forest impacts, forest composition. We kind of sit at the edge of species that are at their limit both north and south. So forest composition may change as a result of the extreme heat. Wildfires proliferate when we get high temperatures. Invasive insects move in. We see that with the southern pine beetle. And geographic species range. We've got species that are moving into and out of the region based upon those temperatures. Species and landscape impacts. So we anticipate we may see a loss of native species. Again, migration and habitat transition is likely to occur. I have a slide in my presentation that talks about how this region will likely start to experience the temperatures that are right now being experienced down in South Carolina and Alabama. So, you know, those high summertime temperatures are creeping north and will basically settle into these regions as a result of these increasing temperatures. And water resource impacts. Water supplies will be stressed. Surface water quality impairments are likely to occur because microbiological organisms thrive under warm temperatures, and so where we get pathogens present in surface waters, we may see increased levels of those pathogens in our surface waters, causing those beaches to shut down. And in some cases, those beaches act as de facto cooling centers where people seek relief by hitting the local swimming hole, and that may be a problem if we've got problems with fungal algal blooms and microbiological pathogens present. So I did want to note that the IAC will be hosting a public webinar on these extreme heat action plans scheduled coming right up March 2nd, 2023 from 6 to 7. I don't have a link to that yet, but I can certainly share that as soon as I find it. And this last item here addresses the organizations that will be represented by that advisory group. So these are the subject matter experts with particular expertise in extreme heat. So the Georgetown Climate Center, there's a Fowler Strategies, a consulting firm. There's Portland State University, a professor there, the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials, Georgia Tech's Urban Climate Lab, and WSP is a large multinational environmental consulting firm. So those are the organizations that will have representatives on this extreme heat advisory council that will help all of our agencies adopt these resilience action plans. So that's the last of my slides. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer.
Oh, thank you, Ed. I'm sure we do. Let me open it up to my fellow commissioners. Anyone with questions or comments for Ed Wengrowski on that presentation? Well, if not, I've got a couple, if you permit. First off, that the IAC webinar that's coming up, is that something that we're going to advertise on our website, or at least, you know, make sure the public has access to it?
That's a great idea, Mark. I don't have a link to it yet. It was referenced in yesterday's meeting, but as soon as that detail becomes available, I'll ask Executive Director Rogan to have that posted on our website.
Yeah, Mark, we actually had one session already, I think earlier this week, or it must have been last week, that we did post and share with our contact following 1,000 or 2,000 people or so. So, you know, we are part of what we're charged with doing by the IAC is to do outreach and publicity, if you will, for these webinars and events that meetings that DEP itself is holding. So we are continuing to do that. They often send us their language and the press packet, if you will, to be sent out and shared. So we'll continue to do that. Yeah.
Okay, I probably didn't have to ask. We're normally very, very good about that stuff. So just in an excess of caution, I guess. I have some questions about the staffing issues that are posed by what you were talking about, Ed. It seems that with all of these potential impacts that we're anticipating, that the burden on our staff to monitor conditions in the Pinelands for forest impacts, species impacts, and the various other impacts you were talking about, it's probably going to put much more of a demand on our staff. Is there any thought to that in terms of do we have adequate staff to manage the kind of work that's anticipated? And are we going to have to be seeking grant funds in order to cover some of the monitoring that will have to go on for that? Any thought to those things?
Yeah, I mean, you've identified an issue that I hadn't even gotten to that yet. I was more thinking of an immediate concern about who is preparing these documents and working with the advisory group. Making sure that we meet all our deadlines that are coming at us fast and furious. So that part of things I can tell you, I was saving them for the end of the meeting, but I can tell you now that one of the things that I've been working on with the governor's office and with Laura are job descriptions and job announcements and salary ranges and funding for a number of positions, one of which a full-time climate resilience coordinator that we would have here on staff, who would be organizing and coordinating and writing and dealing with all of these plans, issues, and action items that we need to that we need to prepare for. So that at least is good news. Obviously, that person's not going to be the one out in the field monitoring or generating data necessarily, but it will be of huge help to us to have somebody dedicated to that and to this committee as well. So I think once we've identified, once we have these action plans, like I said, this is just the first. And there will be more coming that perhaps are more directly relevant to the work that the commission does. Flooding was one, and there's a whole list of them that will be coming up year by year. So I think once we have a little bit more of an idea about those and how they affect the commission specifically and what actions we come up with, that should help us seek grant funding, I would think, depending on what's available. And so we're just going to have to wait and see about that. We're in the very early stages of this first action plan. It's not entirely clear to me yet just how detailed these plans are going to be, or whether they're just general, we're just, like I said, bullet points. Are we being, I don't know yet really, whether we're being asked to identify just issues or actions that could be taken, or also how we would go about achieving some of these goals or implementing some of these actions. So I'm a little fuzzy on that. I think that will play out over the next few months so that we'll have a better idea of how much detail and what some of these action items are. Obviously, we need to stay focused, I think, in these plans on what the commission's authorities are, and not just our authority, but our ability to implement some of these things, so they do need to be pretty specific to our abilities and authorities. So I think this first one will be a good test case to see how we do, and then we'll be able to figure out funding opportunities. I mean, that really hasn't been mentioned yet by the IEC, at least to my knowledge, any funding opportunities or grants that might be available, but it's a good thing to bring up for sure.
Oh, I hope so. Do we have any indication yet how the governor's office is feeling with regard to the idea of us having a climate resilience officer position here?
Very supportive.
Oh, that's good to hear. Okay, great. Any of my fellow committee members a question or comment on this?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Jerry.
Just a comment. I'm somewhat surprised that Rutgers University does not have a membership on the advisory council. We really have a strong state psychologist who has years and years of records that should be available to to the group. So I'm somewhat surprised that Rutgers don't have a seat or even a more of a leading role.
My guess, Jerry, is that Rutgers will be participating in some fashion, if not with this particular resilience action plan and advisory group, but in future advisory groups. There was an extensive process they went through to form these advisory groups, right? I mean, we all had to submit names and ideas, and so I don't know how they sorted through all of them and picked the ones that they did, but perhaps they felt that I would assume that for extreme heat, these were the experts, but I don't know. I'm not sure how they did that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jerry. I mean, Dave Robinson has been our go-to source on these issues for several years now. So, well, Susan's right that Rutgers will have a role at some point. Okay, if there are no other questions, I guess we can move on then to the DEP's water supply plan update. Madam Director.
I foolishly let Gina go on vacation this week, so she made me a few slides, just a couple, so this will be just a brief update. So this is another thing that, another initiative that we are participating in. Gina attends all of the DEP's water supply plan or water supply advisory council meetings. And after the last meeting, she thought it would be worth just making this committee aware of what is upcoming in terms of the statewide water supply plan. Oh, it works. Okay. So they're in the midst of preparing a 5-year update. The water supply plan was last issued in 2017, so it's past time, if you will, for them to do an update. They're in the process. This is DEP of holding stakeholder meetings, gathering information and ideas that will inform this update process. They have monthly water supply advisory council meetings, so there's a series of presentations that have been happening and will be scheduled in the future. I'm sure one of those will be on the results of the stakeholder meetings. But of interest mostly for us this time around is that they've decided to include a chapter in the water supply plan on climate change impacts to water supply. So as soon as Gina heard that, her radar went off, and she thought, okay, so that's definitely good. That's new. And you can see here, they're starting to flesh out what that chapter might look like. There we go. And these are all things that they have mentioned at the last meeting. Again, this is not, really done in detail yet, but these are the items that they've been discussing and will continue to discuss. Obviously, increased saltwater intrusion. That's a constant concern and topic that that DEP is discussing. Potential changes in water availability. That's a big concern for the commission as well. If you recall, our almost adopted Kirkwood Cohansey water management rules reference a low flow margin and regulate based on that. That's something that comes from DEP, and they are concerned here that there will be a decreased stream low flow margin available. That obviously will affect future water supply throughout the state, including in the Pinelands. Flash droughts need to be factored into the equation. And then they talked about groundwater recharge. Again, hotter, longer summers. That kind of ties back into the extreme heat issue we were just discussing. Can lead to higher water use predictions. So they're just starting to identify topics and concerns to address in this chapter, which Gina and I both think is great and very timely. So there's a lot of these. Plus, I wanted to show you this morning just to emphasize that there are a lot of moving pieces, but they all do tie together pretty well in terms of rules and new plans that are coming and the ISD and all of that. So we are keeping an eye on all of these different things and participating as best we can in all of them. And this one I think is of particular interest. So we'll be reporting back to this committee as they get a little bit further along in drafting this chapter. I think that's it, right? Yeah, they don't have a specific schedule yet, just that they know they need to produce an update of the water supply plan. I think probably by the end of this year, but we'll have to keep an eye on that. That is all.
Okay. Any committee members with questions for our director over that update?
I do, Mark. Sue,
Go ahead, Ed.
once the plan is adopted, will it again, be used in decision-making processes at both DEP and the Pines? Or do we need to adopt regs to implement it?
I don't, that's a good question, Ed. I don't know about DEP. I can only speak for us, and really the only, depending on what the water supply plan recommends, we might need to consider additional rules. I'm hoping that's not the case because it's going to take us till this summer to finish the adoption for the perfect comprehensive water management rules, which is really our primary tool for dealing with water supply. I think at this point, those rules refer back to the water supply plan and specific charts and calculations that are in the water supply plan. So they do that by reference. So again, it's kind of like with the stormwater rules. If the water supply plan is changed or the low flow margin numbers are changed, then our rules would automatically tie into those updated numbers. So it's just something we're going to have to keep an eye on to see how DEP is planning to proceed with the water supply plan. And if that impacts our rules or generates the need for us to do something different. It's hard to say at this point.
Hope not.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm hoping not, because it's like a never-ending cycle.
Commissioner Avery, have a question?
I might have missed this in the beginning. Who's directing the interagency? Who's in charge?
Well, so there is a state climate resilience officer at DEP, and he's in charge of the interagency council. The governor established the council. The governor decided who was going to be on the council. The state's resiliency officer works for DEP and heads up the council.
And we know what his title is in DEP. Is like a deputy commissioner, assistant commissioner, bureau chief.
I would have to check. I don't know if he has another title or if he's simply state resiliency officer. I don't.
Yeah, this was a specially created office, wasn't it, Susan? I mean, this didn't exist before last year.
But level of authority he had over other parts of DEP.
Just from attending prior meetings, I would say pretty significant.
Okay.
Yeah, they've all clearly heard the charge that they need to participate fully and provide support to the interagency council. DEP is staffing the council and, providing administrative support. So I think that message has been delivered and implemented throughout DEP.
And do we have, I don't remember any municipality in the Pinelands that uses surface water as a source of drinking water. I know it's used in agriculture. But do we have any towns that have connections to the surface water for local water supply? I don't think so.
I don't know. Already sticking with it. Right?
Within Pinelands. Not within Pinelands. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Anyone else? Okay, well, Susan, thanks very much for that presentation. Helpful to know. Like I said, hopefully we won't have to coordinate with development of our own regs with regard to the water supply plan, but we'll see. Next, I've asked Susan to include as a standing item on our climate committee agendas an update on office initiatives, which largely encompass our work toward developing amendments to the CMP that are related to climate mitigation. So let me throw it back to the director for today's update.
Okay, so a couple things. One, I did want to go back to, because I have something to add on the state initiatives I wanted to bring to the committee's attention. Been discussing this with the Highlands Council recently, and then it was also brought to our attention that the Rutgers Climate Corps, which is a group of grad students, they're both engaged in helping municipalities with their what's called the climate change related hazard vulnerability assessments. Towns are charged with doing this as part of their, whenever they're ready to do an update to their municipal master plan, they now have to do this assessment and include it as part of the land use element of their master plans. So we noted recently that the Highlands Council engaged a consultant, they're actually using New Jersey Future to develop like a template and guidance documents for municipalities in putting together these assessments. We're keeping our eye on that and attending webinars and just making sure we know how that's moving along, because I expect that those documents will be useful throughout the state, not just for Highlands municipalities. So I'm hoping it's something that Highlands municipalities will be able to take advantage of as well. And then similarly, the Rutgers Climate Corps is also working with municipalities in putting together the hazard vulnerability assessments to inform the state's plan endorsement process that the State Planning Commission uses in working with municipalities outside the Pinelands area, but also not just for plan endorsement purposes, but also to provide information and again, help municipalities put together these assessments. So we're also going to be keeping an eye on that. I think that hopefully some of that will be of use to our municipalities. I wish that we had grant funding to give out to our municipalities the way the Highlands Council does to help the towns put together these documents and analyses, but we do not. But I think having these templates and resources available, if we can promote that and distribute them to our municipalities, would be helpful in that effort. So I think that coming up, one of the things we'll be doing, perhaps in hopefully at the April meeting, is talking to you about the management area boundary analysis that we discussed a couple times. And that's really geared at identifying areas that are vulnerable to climate change, that are perhaps designated for more growth than they should be. That's part of this hazard vulnerability assessment. So I think it all does tie in together. And the timing is good. I mean, that'll be one of our climate specific pieces of information that could be part of this assessment. So we'll be looking at whatever the Highlands Council's consultants produce and combining that with our own data and assessments to try and help our towns move forward. They won't all have to do this at once, which is kind of nice. They're charged with doing it when they're ready to do a master plan update. So it'll be somewhat staggered, and that may help us work more closely with specific municipalities. But it is something that's ongoing, that there's all kinds of pieces of this happening throughout the state. So we're going to be trying to coordinate all of that for our towns as well. Okay, so that was just one last state initiative I wanted to mention. Office initiatives, I'm going to ask Jessica first to run through very specific internal operation type things that we are doing here. These are things we identified and mentioned to the committee that would be our goal to implement here, somewhat as a result of the state energy audit. So I just wanted Jessica to give you an update on that before we talk more about the policy matters.
Good morning, this is Jessica Lynch. I am the business manager for the commission, and I'm going to go over a brief update on our internal path to sustainability. A couple months ago, the commission participated in a BPU-sponsored energy audit. The outcome of that audit, of many things, was for us to begin changing over to LED lights, which we already have. We've been doing it probably about a year now, even before the suggestion, we were starting to go to LEDs. We are also starting to use battery-powered grounds equipment. We recently, our gas-powered lawnmower had issues, so instead of replacing it, we're taking this opportunity to use electrical power. We also have a trimmer, a leaf blower, and the interim right now is the push mower as we phase into getting a ride-on mower. We're looking for a ride-on mower. We are hoping to get a Ryobi or something, a 42-inch deck mower. It's going to be funded by the Energy Conservation Reserve. There's a couple steps we have to do before we attain the mower. We have to get rid of the other mower. I'd like to put it on Gov Deal so we can get some money back for it, which will be filtered back into our budget, and then get some quotes out there to see what we can get. We looked at some of the commercial ones. Unfortunately, those are well out of our price range and a little bit too robust for what is needed for what we have. All these different pieces of equipment are significantly quieter than a gas mower. We don't have the fumes. I mean, it sounds like, to put it in perspective, like a drill gun, in essence, as opposed to a gasoline lawnmower. And the difference between the fact that this lawnmower is a brushless lawnmower as opposed to a brush lawnmower That's the difference between an electric mower and a gasoline mower. Gasoline mower is a brush mower, which connects to the drive shaft, whereas a brushless mower has a technology where it could compensate for the power that is needed. We are looking to apply for a medium to heavy duty electrical vehicle charging program through BPU. They plan on using the funding from RGGI, which is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. There are two different options for this grant. There is a fleet charging, which would be a private fleet, or the communal charging. When I wrote to them to see if we would be available as a state agency to apply for this, they suggested that we go for the communal charging. So there is $225,000 available for charging stations. So the deadline for that is May 12th. So I'll be applying for that. And the last thing is we're soon to be putting out our RFQ for vehicles, two new vehicles for the commission. Our currently, right now, the vehicles that are on state contract unfortunately do not have the high enough ground clearance for our field work. So we're looking for something with at least 10 inches or more ground clearance. Right now, the Jeeps have 10 to 10.8 ground clearance, depending on which model you get. The only other items out in the world right now that would have any higher ground clearance, and unfortunately they are fairly costly, are the Rivian, which has a 14-inch ground clearance, and then and the Hummers, which have a 16-inch ground clearance. And they respectively start each vehicle. The Rivians start at 78,000, and the Hummers start at 98,000. So we're going to put an RFP out to the existing vehicles on state contract because they pretty much have passenger vehicles right now currently listed on state contract, but we're going to see if they maybe on their lot they happen to have something that would best fit our needs. And that's it for me. Anybody have any questions?
All right, commissioners, defer to you first. Any questions or comments for Jess?
Mark, I did see John pushing the electric lawnmower this morning on my way to get to feed. So
Wow,
to verify that he's in possession.
that's really great to hear.
I think it's
I'm
gonna
sorry.
be difficult to find an affordable hybrid or electric vehicle in the current state of affairs. I've been following online the shortage of supply. You know, Ford has stopped taking orders and
Yeah,
all that, so good luck, Jessica.
Thank you.
Yeah, the timing is
Thanks,
not
man.
great. It's really not great, but field season is approaching and we need to try and be ready, you know.
So if you could do a short term lease, that little bit you turn it in when the market for hybrids and EVs were better, but you're paying for it.
Yes, and we tend to beat up our vehicles, so I don't know if leasing is.
We did lease in the past. Prior to me, we did lease,
Yeah.
and we, under my understanding, we are slammed with fees for the destruction of the vehicle. So, yeah.
So we'll keep
go ahead, Jerry.
I'd be concerned also about a used vehicle because we don't know that much about the battery part of it. So my recommendation would be going ahead
Yeah.
if we can.
I'd only add to that it's very exciting to see what you're doing, Jess. That's great progress. It's funny, when we initially talked about this a year ago, we hadn't even talked about maintenance equipment for the grounds, and obviously that's a great area. You've been able to make some really good progress there by converting all that gas powered equipment over to electric, so that's great to see. And there are many benefits apart from not burning the gas, not adding to our carbon footprint. As you pointed out, it's also much quieter, and our workers can avoid all that exposure to the exhaust fumes from that equipment. So lots of benefits from that. I'm really glad to see that you acted on that already. And as far as the vehicle goes, yeah, I realize it's still a difficult thing to meet our specs, to find an electric vehicle that can do it. I think over the year ahead, hopefully there will be more vehicles available. As Alan pointed out, Ford makes a pickup truck, the Ford F-150 Lightning, that I would guess meets our specs at the moment. It's not available. Hopefully that will clear up within another month or two, and that might be something we could go for. Yeah, the Rivian is very pricey right now, but it certainly meets our specs. Hopefully there will be other options. I would just like to emphasize, from my point of view, we should do all we can to make sure what we invest in, which is going to be a vehicle that we use for the next at least 5 years, probably, ought to be an electric vehicle, not a hybrid vehicle, since the hybrids still have gas engines in them. Yeah, they also have batteries, and they can charge for a short distance of use, but they still burn gas. And it would be great if we could make the break and make that long-term commitment to just having an EV for our needs. So in any event, that's all I had on it. Did anyone else have any other comment about any of that?
Yeah, I'll just say that, I mean, while I agree with you, Mark, that electric would be best. There, obviously, we have to see if we can find one that meets our specs, or that will be available, this year. And before we invest funding in an electric vehicle, we need to have our own charging station installed, or we'll be dead in the water. So we have to get that moving first to see what kind of grants are available and what kind of time frame we're talking about in terms of being able to install the charging station or stations. Anyway, so again, lots of moving pieces, but we're going to try to identify what's out there and what's available, and apply for the grants that we're eligible for, so we can get that part of things moving along.
Okay, thanks. That makes a lot of sense. All right, if there are no other comments, then I'd like to open the meeting up to public comment.
I've got a question, Mark.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Through the current equipment that we're using, sir, what's the life expectancy of that? In other words, do we have to replace in the next 6 months, 1 year, 2 years? How much time do we have to get a charging station in place, and ideally a vehicle that meets our specs in place?
Right. So what we're looking for are two new vehicles. One that would replace the Prius, which is from 2004. It's very old. 2006, very, very old, and of limited use. You can't take that into the field to do the kind of work that our offices need. So we'd be getting one additional vehicle, because we already knew from last year and the year before that we're really short on availability of field vehicles, and then a second one to replace the Prius. So I'm not sure how to answer the question. I mean, ideally we would have at least one new vehicle available for the field season, starting up in the spring. It'd be great to have one. But again, we're not going to have a charging station purchased and installed by then. So just a little concerned, and need to think a little bit about what needs to come first and when. I think once we issue the RFQ for the vehicles, we'll have a much better idea of price and availability and timing. And that might help us figure out, maybe we need to get one that's a hybrid right now, and then plan for an electric vehicle, a second one in the future when it's available and ready, and we have a charging station. I guess the application is due in May. I don't know the timing of when they'll be handing those out. There may be additional grants that we can identify and apply for as well. So it's something we're definitely working on that would be helped significantly if we had our climate resilience coordinator on staff, because that person, could be devoted to searching for grants and making grant applications and dealing with some of these issues, so that Jessica's not running around crazier than she usually is, trying to identify grants and do grant applications and all these things that you really do need a staff person devoted to doing. So it'll be a couple months before we have that person on board. So we're trying to sort of move things along as best we can in the interim. And hopefully once we put out the RFQ, and we'll have a little bit more information, we'll get responses about how this might all need to be staged or you know, as we work through the rest of the year to figure out what we can do and when.
Just, is there a state approved vendor list of people to install charging stations?
No, not that I've seen. There are a lot of grants out there. There's some educational grants out there. I have not seen a list for installers. There's an electrical contractors list, but not specifically for
We'd have to look into that and see,
charging station.
because that's always a challenge for us, is to find someone who will come here
Yeah.
to do the work that we need.
If the charging station becomes an issue, and it sounds like it could, and we're ready to go forward with a vehicle, is it possible we could contract with an existing charging station? I mean, I'm blue skying here. I mean, they're 5 miles down the road, there's a gas facility, I shouldn't say gas station, should I? A shopping center that has a charging station.
That's
Would it be
charging.
possible to contract with an existing charging station so that the absence of our charging station doesn't hold us up?
I don't know, we could look into that. I mean, my understanding is there really isn't much in the immediate vicinity that could be used. I know PPA has a charging station, so we could maybe.
Yeah, that's right.
Um,
PPA has
definitely
two.
look into that. You know, one of the issues too with the field vehicles is, you know, they're gonna need to be charged, you know, every night and brought back to the office or brought back somewhere else. It's just, there's a lot to coordinate, but it's a good idea that we, you know, we'll look at what's in the vicinity. I know that Pemberton Township doesn't have anything, so we'll just have to take a look at that to see if there's anything around where that kind of arrangement might work.
How about Gamora? Does Gamora have anything?
Not to my knowledge, but again, we can do a bit of a survey to see what else is around.
Yeah.
But I don't know how willing any of these places would be to have us, you know, monopolizing the charging station every night. But we'll see what we can come up with.
Well, as you mentioned, Susan, Pinelands Preservation Alliance does have one, and sure, and that they're pretty close. So maybe we could work something out with them where we get to use it. Any other comment there? There was something that occurred to me that I just wanted to add to this conversation, tuck it away as one thought to bear in mind as we research these potential new vehicles to buy, and that is that if we do invest in a new EV, rather than hybrid, even though the EVs are more expensive on average to purchase, the operating costs are so much less. The maintenance costs are so much less. You tend not to use brakes in an EV because of the regenerative braking feature that they have. So the brakes go much longer without needing replacement. There is no transmission. You don't buy gas or oil. There's nothing to lube. There are far fewer moving parts. So it costs much less to operate. So we have to remember to weigh those factors in as we evaluate, is it worth this purchase price? So just throw that out there as a note for us to consider. All right, so if there are no other comments or questions from the committee or the staff, I'd like to open the meeting up to public comment now, if we could. All right, could we post the dial-in phone number for the public to see? Thank you. All right, we'll give the public a few minutes here to call in. Is there anyone in the room there that's there from the public to speak?
Yes.
Oh, there is? Okay.
Yeah,
Heidi from PPA is at the microphone.
Okay. Hello, I'm Heidi Ye, Policy Director for the Pinelands Preservation Alliance. Can definitely sympathize with the struggle of finding an electric vehicle. I don't have any special field needs, but I placed an order for a Chevy Bolt EUV back in October and we were told June. That's the earliest update. That's when we're gonna get it. But yes, I don't know how broadly we want to broadcast this, but we do have free charging at PPA, 2 carports. Part of the reason why I want to get an electric vehicle. But I also want to reiterate everything that Mark said. If you can find something that will fit your needs, you'll reap a lot of benefits from that. So perhaps you might need to consider some more temporary solutions in the meantime. So on personnel, we want to congratulate Ed Wengrowski on his forthcoming retirement. and to thank him for the work that he's done on this topic of climate change throughout his career. And we'd also like to laud the Pinelands Commission for moving to hire a climate resilience coordinator to spearhead the efforts. I am wondering what progress has been made on the policy priorities that were identified in previous meetings. Just want to give an FYI that a group of graduate students from Princeton has been working with us to provide literature review and analysis that can help support those climate goals that you all have expressed in previous meetings. So these students are coming from a diversity of fields, including atmospheric science, computational biology, renewable energy policy, as well as ecology and evolution. So we're going to plan to present their findings in a white paper by May of this year and include some solid policy recommendations, especially on the solar farm siting regulations and no net loss of trees, just with some ideas for how these can most effectively be implemented. And then we would like to extend an invitation to all commissioners and staff to attend our first ever science forum that will be on May 19th. That's a Friday. The theme for which will be climate change in the Pinelands. So we plan to convene policymakers, scientists, and the public for a full day of presentations and other learning opportunities on our campus, again with the free charging. We hope that you all can join us to learn from academics, government officials, and other nonprofit leaders about the work being done in the Pinelands to understand and combat climate change. So that's all that I have. Thank you.
We have no callers. Mark, you're muted if you're talking.
So Mark, we don't have any other callers. And there's no other public in the room. So I think we are good to go.
Mark's muted at the moment.
He's muted, yeah. Oops, where did he go?
And we lost him.
No, it's, okay, so obviously. Like he was in the car, so. I'm quite sure. Okay, well, then I guess, in Mark's absence, anyone else, Jerry, anything?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Okay,
Can I make one comment before we adjourn?
sure.
Just going back a little bit in the conversation.
You need to use the mic or we won't be able to hear you. Probably reminded them who you were.
Steve Simone with the Pinelands Commission. Just one comment for the good of the order. Perhaps one partnering organization we can look into with EV charging is the post office. They have a post office right down the street here. And they recently announced that they were going 50% EV in the next few years. So maybe we can.
Oh, you don't mean this post office is going to be making that announcement, you mean? Post office in general?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, certainly. Yeah. I don't think they're gonna be doing it tomorrow, but we'll see. I mean, you know, that's not a very high volume post office, so I'll be curious to see if that. You know, where they invest their money initially on charging stations, but yeah, that would be great.
Just an idea.
You never know.
Might be an option.
I'm not sure what's happening. Mark is returned or he's.
Mark is having telephone issues and you'd like to nominate Ed Lloyd to complete the meeting.
Oh, Ed, okay.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second,
Okay.
all in favor? Aye. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, Ed.
Take care,
Yeah,
everybody.
tough job. Be well.